Welcome to the American Voter Project at the Eric H. Holder Jr. Initiative for Civil and Political Rights.
Thank you for that standing ovation. That was great. That was great.
I'm Neal. I teach at Georgetown, and on behalf of the initiative, I'm delighted to welcome you to this afternoon's discussion of the upcoming midterm elections. And I've had the pleasure of doing 2 of these panels virtually with the Holder Center over the last couple of years. This is, I believe, the very first time since the pandemic began that this is in person.
Exactly
right.
So
it's really exciting to be here and with this really stellar panel. Of course, we're starting with Eric Holder, the 82nd Attorney General of the United States, also Columbia College Class of 73, Columbia Law School.
You didn't have to say the year. Because they're like going, this dude is old.
He's
Until
old.
They meet me.
Wait till you meet me.
Eric might be old, but he is, I moved to Washington in 1996 and got to know him in the year 1998, and there's not a finer person in my city. And I think about the degradation of what our city has become and the lack of values and principle, and you have always stood for the opposite of that. And in so many ways, big and small, so many ways that were quiet, that I saw you do things that were non-political and right. And so this center, I hope, carries that legacy and tradition forward. Okay, from that, we've got Donna Brazile, the genius political strategist, ABC News. I'm not sure why she's doing the ABC thing. I'm an NBC guy.
I was tired of being the silver fox on Fox News, so I went back home to ABC.
Turns out there's another network, but in any event, you were the first Black woman to run a presidential campaign, serving for the Vice President Gore. You've written a couple of best-selling books. In 2004, Cooking with Grease. In 2017, Hacks, the inside story of the break-ins and breakdowns that put Donald Trump in the White House. I can't imagine how long that book must have been. And we're also joined by María Teresa Kumar, the founding president of Voto Latino. She's an American activist, a social entrepreneur, and an Emmy-winning MSNBC commentator. Voto Latino reaches 6.5 million people monthly, and it leverages youth, technology, social platforms, and the like to get out voting and so on. And so can't wait to hear a little more about that. And finally, we are joined by Professor Gregory Warrow, who teaches political science, and he's the chair of the political science department here. He specializes in American politics, including Congress, elections, campaign finance, judicial politics, and political economy. And I looked at the list of publications, and it's literally every journal in political science that you've heard of, and many haven't as well. So delight to have you. And what I wanted to do, Eric, maybe first was start with you and with gerrymandering, because you left the Attorney Generalship and you launched this big project around gerrymandering. Why and what is the state right now? Can you bring us through your work all the way up to the New York decision yesterday?
Sure. Well, we redistrict every 10 years on the basis of the census that is constitutionally mandated to occur every 10 years. Princeton University did a study of the redistricting in 2011 and said it was the most gerrymandered redistricting we've had for the last half century. And that had an impact for the course of the following decade, the decade that we've just exited, where Republicans had a disproportionate amount of power at both the state level as well as at the federal level. If you look at the 2012 election, Democrats won 1.2 million more votes than Republicans for United States House of Representatives, and we ended up with a 33-seat, with a minority. They had a 33-seat majority on the basis of the gerrymandering that was done in 2011. So Gerrymandering has a really negative impact. In gerrymandered districts, you're not concerned about a general election, you're concerned about a primary. That's the thing that motivates you. It pushes people further and further to the right, and to be fair, sometimes pushes people further and further to the left. The notion of compromise is seen as a weakness, and that leads to gridlock and leads to dissatisfaction, disillusionment with the process. And so I thought for those reasons, I wanted to try to make sure that in 2021, now going into 2022 with the pandemic and the impact on the census, that we had a fair process. Because I actually think, I'm a very partisan Democrat, I actually think that if we have a fair process, progressives and Democrats will do just fine. We'll do just fine. And so we've had a number of victories in terms of putting in place independent commissions in a number of states. Michigan, we had litigation victories that have helped as well. We have supported candidates who would stand for a fair redistricting process. The New York decision, I guess that came down from the Court of Appeals yesterday, day before yesterday, looked at what Democrats have done here in New York, where they drew a map, I'll be honest, that was not a map that I would have drawn. I think they went a little far in trying to advantage Democrats in New York. But it is not as bad as people might think, because the map that they were dealing with from 2011 was one that gave Republicans in New York far too many seats based on population. It was a deal that then Governor Cuomo cut with Republicans that artificially inflated the number of Republican seats. So a special master is now going to look at the New York maps and will draw them, and I suspect Democrats will lose a couple of seats. But overall, if you look at where we are now in 2022, we have stopped what Republicans said what they were going to do, which is they wanted to draw themselves into a decade of power. That's what they said. And they're not going to be able to do that because of the structural, electoral, and litigation victories that we've had. It's going to be a fair decade. Now, not as fair as it should be, because if it were totally fair, we would have 40% more competitive seats. We have fewer competitive seats now than we did before, but in terms of Republican-Democratic balance, we actually are going to be better. We have more seats than they do, and far more than we had in 2011.
And Donna, how do you think about that as we go into the next election cycles? Is it really a lot fairer? And how does this intersect with things like voter suppression, the lack of voter enthusiasm among Democrats? Even if things are relatively even, given these other trends, how worried should we be?
Well, first of all, it's great to be here, and I can't tell you how extremely proud I am of Eric Holder for his leadership, for his service to our country, and of course, the fact that Eric has just been an amazing and incredible leader in our country. So thank you, Eric, and thank you for inviting me. It's always good to come up to New York when it's cool outside. I have been involved in every midterm election since 1982. And when I look at the maps that we will likely be participating this year, I do believe that they have come out much better than expected, given the fact that Republicans control, 61 out of 99 legislative, branches of our government. Republican governors outnumber Democratic governors. And Republicans have put enormous effort and resources into redistricting, starting back in the 1980s. Eric, I remember back in the late 1980s, after 88, when I warned the Democratic Party that the Republicans were drawing districts in the South that would create these supermajority minority districts and siphon votes from areas where Democrats could be more competitive. And it came to pass. Yes, we did increase the number of African Americans, Black members of Congress, Latino members in a few states, but by and large, we lost a lot of moderate Democrats. Fast forward 30 years, looking into the future, when Karl Rove and Ed Gillespie had more than, these are Republican strategists, and you can Google them. I'm not going to give them any praise today. They spent over $100 million.
Yep.
They took this process seriously. Meanwhile, on the Democratic side, I can guarantee you if we spent $10 million, it was $10 million that I didn't see. And so here come Eric Holder and our former President Barack Obama to really lead something that we should have been invested in 20, 30 years ago. The fact that we are entering an election season with likely 40 competitive seats compared to possibly 174 back in the 1980s. So advantage Republicans, because they understand this game and they understand that you cannot play just in 7 or 8 battleground states. You got to play in all 50 states. If you really want to have, a system by which both major parties and probably some minor parties, because the majority of Americans are independent, you are not aligned with either political party, then you have to have fair districts. I look at what just happened in Florida. I mean, Florida. I've been talking about Florida now for almost 20 years. And the only reason why I go is because I have to maintain my tan. And with 29 electoral votes, you better stay in Florida. But look at the latest voter registration numbers in Florida. Republicans have gained over the last 5 years. Democrats down. In states where we don't have automatic registration, Democrats are down. Why? Because we're no longer doing door knocking and really meeting voters where they are. Look at Terry McAuliffe's loss in last year. Terry McAuliffe in Virginia. He lost by less than 64,000 votes. Why? Because he didn't go into areas where there were rural voters. There were people who lived beyond the suburbs. And many of those communities are communities of color. You assume because they're rural, they're all white. No, that's not true. So when I look at this landscape today, it is not as bad as it could have been. It's going to be tough. Can Democrats still pull out a victory and maintain their thin majority in the House? Yeah, I don't want to put my house on it, or my car, or my dog. But, I like a fight. I think we can do it, but we have to start talking to people. And we need forget this whole thing that we need a message. We need messengers.
That's right.
I go out on TV every Sunday. I don't see governors. I don't see senators. So in addition to trying to figure out what Joe Biden is saying and Kamala Harris, I have to figure out what the Senate is doing. I got to figure out what is H.R. 3522. Well, Joe Biden just talked about it. It's a supplemental that will give him more resources. But I got to figure it out because there's no senator. And I'm sure María can also say the same. So yes, Democrats still have the ability to win, but it will require good candidates coming out of this round of primaries. It will require substantial resources on the ground, not just on TV. And it will require us to understand that every race matters, from precinct, school board races, all the way up to gubernatorial and senatorial races. And if we don't fight, I don't want to say we don't want to fight like Republicans, because I don't want to ever fight like that. No. I don't want to fight like that.
No lie, cheat, steal?
No, I don't want to, that's right. And you're the lawyer.
Those are technical legal terms.
Well, see, that's why I never went to law school. I wouldn't know the difference. But I don't want to fight like Republicans. I want to fight as if our democracy is on the line. And give people the power of knowing that their votes matter. One last thing, and I know I may have escaped your first question, but I'll answer it this way. We need more young people to decide that this is something that they want to do with their lives. Now, I've been in it for a long time, and I make no excuses. I'm wrapping up my career. I mean, I got 55 congressional, 19 state and local campaigns, and 10 presidential campaigns. You're not getting much more from me. But I can tell you what I want from you. I want you to think about the service that is required to keep this democracy viable. And it will require a lot of you young people who think, well, I don't want to get involved in that mess. Hell, I got in this mess when I wanted to make Dr. King's birthday a holiday. I got in this mess because I wanted to elect Jesse Jackson, thinking that maybe I can get the first black president. Didn't get the first black president, but we eventually got a first black president. And yes, I got in this mess because I wanted to see a woman in the White House. Didn't get presidency, we got vice president. Yes, I am so damn happy I'm sticking around long enough to see a black woman on the Supreme Court. Who else knows what we're gonna get from this? And when you elect good people, you get good policy and good policy results. So why you young people? Because there's no one better. Why now? Because tomorrow's not soon enough. So before we leave tonight, we're going to recruit some of y'all this afternoon. They say, are you going to stick around for the reception? Hell yeah. I'm recruiting. I'm still recruiting. That's my new job. Like the NFL, I'm recruiting y'all. I turn back the balance of my time now.
So Maria Teresa, I want to pick up on that because you have been a leader in voter enthusiasm. I think 15% of people registered in Texas are due to your organization. So how do we do that actually? In particular, people are so discouraged. I mean, they see these spineless people in Washington, D.C., and they think, I don't want to do that. I'd rather do anything else with my life than that.
Well, first of all, I want to ask a question in this crowd. How many of you were born between 2000 and 2010? Raise your hand. No, high with pride. Now look around. You are the reason that there is a resurface of modern day Jim Crow laws. Because in 2010, there was an explosion of young people. You represent America's largest, most diverse generation right now that's eligible to vote. In 2010, Latinos were 52% of the growth in this country who were born here, American-born, who happened to be Latino. Fast forward to 2013, when Shelby County, we won't mention the other person's name, went to the Supreme Court and as a result gutted the Voting Rights Act. The most underreported fact of Shelby County was that that county had experienced a 297% increase in the Latino population, 93% in the African American population. And then you look what happened 3 months later, 22 jurisdictions that basically took away the right to vote had experienced at least a 90% increase in the Latino population. But you guys weren't old enough to vote yet. They were preparing for when you were going to be old enough to vote. And Generation Z became a real force where you're much bigger and much stronger than baby boomers in 2018. So all this great work that Eric Holder has been trying to achieve is to ensure that all of you, every single American, has access to the voting booth. But it's because there's a group of people who don't like your worldview, very simply. They don't like the fact that you believe in climate change. They don't believe that women should have agencies over their bodies. They're trying to ban books in 2022. If there is any doubt of what a Republican-controlled House and Senate would look like, read the tea leaves or pick up a paper. They don't believe in trans youth. They don't believe in your access to the voting booth. And the list goes on. Right now in Texas, we are currently working on a litigation case because, believe it or not, all 50 states declared that 2020 was a fair, free election. Every single Secretary of State said that. And young people came out in record number. In Texas, they got ticked off. So in January of 2021, you know what they did? They decided to sign a litigation of a whole bunch of laws that included that you could not register to vote on a college campus because it was not a permanent residence, but because you were not physically living in your parents' home, you couldn't register to vote there either. So you're in no man's land. And that is because in Texas, in 2020, we continue the trend of a huge young people population coming of age. They experienced over 4 million people coming in, and 95% of those people were people of color, and they granted 0 congressional districts that they won as a result. So when Donna says that we're in a battle of our lifetime, it has less to do with party, but very much with the little d institutions that we're fighting for. Because they're trying to erode the rights that I have today. I have a 9-year-old and 8-year-old 8-year-old. They represent technically the first majority minority country. That's exciting. That's opportunity. But they're trying to limit the rights that my daughter is going to have right now. And if that doesn't get anybody upset, I don't know what will. And I'm tired, we have this like fatalist issue right now going on in this country. And I have to remind each other, we had someone that was so coercive. He told us that he was an autocrat. He played like an autocrat. And what we did the next day is that we marched in all 50 states, but around the globe. And we worked within the parameters of democracy. And we out-registered, out-voted, out-knocked on doors, out-ran for office. In 2018, it was the most explosive participation in 100 years. And we got the most representative government in the House. The most women, the most Black, the most Muslim, the most Latino, the most LGBTQ, you go down the list. And then we're like, wait, actually, we know how to do this. Let's rinse, repeat, and do it again. And we did it in 2020. And we got the House, the Senate, and the White House. Not so much because everybody was in love with the candidate, but because we knew that what the other person represented was against our values, and it was eroding our democracy. I have never seen so many people who are so upset for losing and feeling that they can't do it again. Our call is very simple. And thanks to the great work that Eric has been doing, and so many others, we actually have secured maps so that we can continue doing the work of absolutely running for office, absolutely knocking on doors, and telling people what the stakes are. And so when you ask why we do the work, is because I deeply believe that I don't have to convince a young person that climate change is real. I just need them to go vote for someone who will actually pass those policies or consider running for office. That's exciting because you are literally the largest generation of voters eligible to vote coming in 2022.
Right. And Gregory, I think some might listen to Maria Teresa's powerful remarks and say, yeah, maybe, but we just squeaked by in 2016 and in 2020. And it's not, yes, we made it through, but it won't happen again. The system is rigged in a way that, not in the Trump way, but rigged in a way that's just suppressing our individual voices and votes. Is that where the system is?
So, democracy is a lot about the rules, and even though there's fights over legislation and those kinds of things, a lot of the battles happen outside of the legislative arena, outside of the limelight in terms of dealing with things like electoral rules, like registration rules, those kinds of things. And so, these kinds of battles have been going on forever. Like the first what we would call voter registration or voter restriction, voter ID laws were passed in the 19th century in the United States. And one of the things that's remarkable about that is you can look at cases where states passed laws that made it extremely difficult to vote. Like basically, there was one day of the year where you could go to register, and there was one spot where you could go to register. And some people had to travel 20 miles, 30 miles, 50 miles to do this. But people did it, right? In the 19th century, turnout in elections in the United States was incredibly high, much higher than it is today. So I think that no matter what happens in terms of these attempts to restrict voters, yes, they're going to keep some people from the polls, but there's going to be a reaction to that. And we saw that in Georgia, for example. I mean, the fact that Democrats won both Senate seats in Georgia in 2020 is remarkable. I mean, Georgia, for the longest time, has been a deep red state. Democrats have a much better chance of winning in Georgia than they did in Florida. I mean, who would have predicted that like 10, 15 years ago? And I think a lot of that has to do with Stacey Abrams and the ground game, the organization to fight back against attempts to restrict certain constituencies from exercising their voting rights. And so I anticipate that as long as Democrats are willing to wage those kinds of battles, right? That they're willing to invest, like Donna was saying, the dollars, as long as they recruit people who are energized and willing to do the hard shoe leather work, knocking on doors. I'm confident that there's precedent in American history that you can overcome these kinds of restrictions. It's not going to be easy. It's not. These are very serious restrictions that are being imposed. But I don't think it means that that things are permanently rigged in the Democrats' favor. I mean, you can go back in American history and say there are times when it looks like the Democrats are going to be a perpetual majority, right? So New Deal on, from like the early 2000s. There are cases where like where Republicans were winning state legislative races, winning state houses. It's like, oh, they're going to relegate Democrats to the minority. Certain Supreme Court cases, that's going to build in a structural advantage for Republicans. And it does, but there are ways to fight back against that. And so it takes a lot of work, takes a lot of organization, but the pendulum in American politics swings back and forth all the time. And I think it swung in the favor of Republicans for many years. They've taken advantage of that, trying to structure the rules of the game to give them an advantage. Democrats have done the same thing when they've been in control. And so the big fear that I have is essentially there are some things that will happen, like what seems to be the intention of January 6th, that will prevent that pendulum from swinging back. So as long as we can stop that from happening, I'm confident that these micro battles that take place over election law, over registration rules and those kinds of things, that you can fight back against them and not have the game rigged for one party or another for any length of time.
Eric, one retrospective question. Gregory's mentioned the Supreme Court and María, Teresa, that the decision in Shelby County versus an unnamed individual. I argued the predecessor case back in 2009, Northwest Austin versus Holder. It's the same exact constitutional issue, the constitutionality of this 1965 Voting Rights Act. I won it 8-1. And I remember during the oral argument, Justice Scalia asked my co-counsel from the NAACP, he said, that this Voting Rights Act was reauthorized in 2006, 98-0 in the Senate. What possible thing passes the Senate 98-0? It must be symbolic. And I was dying because I had, this is the answer you always dream of as a Supreme Court advocate. I wanted to stand up and say, Justice Scalia, your confirmation vote was 98-0, which it was. But it was, the Voting Rights Act was reauthorized 98-0 in the Senate, 421-3 in the House in 2006. You have an 8-1 Supreme Court decision upholding the constitutionality of the act. Only Clarence Thomas dissents in 2009. And then all of a sudden, 4 years later, 5-4 decision striking it down, and now you can't get a majority in the Senate, or certainly a filibuster-proof majority, to reauthorize the Voting Rights Act today, and Republicans run scared. What in the world happened? We had a consensus that this is the most cherished of our rights.
Mm-hmm. Well, first let me say this. You've introduced all of us. This is the greatest appellate lawyer in America right now. All right? You're looking...
Serving drinks, I guess, huh?
No. Neal was the acting Solicitor General. I've known him for, a good number of years. And at some point, and in some way, I hope this young man ends up on the Supreme Court of the United States. He's brilliant. He's also a consensus builder. He would be a force on the Supreme Court in a way that would be a very positive thing. So I might have to run for president so I can appoint you or something.
I think there are many reasons.
Are you making news? Are you breaking news right now?
No, it's just there are other ways we'll get him on the court.
And I'll come out of retirement to work on Eric's campaign.
No. It's an interesting thing, Neal, and I'm not sure what happened, but there was a break. And once that break occurred, it then became politically okay, socially okay, to say, you know what, I'm not in favor of the 1965 Voting Rights Act, where before you almost got shamed for being in opposition to it. I mean, every reauthorization of the act was signed by a Republican president, and now it is an article of faith that the Voting Rights Act has to be taken down. Shelby County, dealt in essentially, undermines the notion of pre-clearance, what the Justice Department had. I fear, and I would be interested to hear what your views are about what Section 2 is going to look like. Next year we won a case in Alabama where a couple of Trump judges said that, African Americans in Alabama are underrepresented, the way in which the lines are drawn. You need to create another minority opportunity district there in Alabama. Trump judges, at that level. I'm thinking, okay, we won that case. That was great. Supreme Court, through the use of the shadow docket and everything, says, well, no, too close to the election, a whole variety of things. We'll look at this. And I think that case. Others might be the vehicle for them to gut, what the one remaining part of the Voting Rights Act. And I'm not totally sure what happened, but there was a sea change. There was a break between that 98 to 0 vote and where we are, where we are now.
Does anyone else want to get in on that, or should I move on?
I think part of it was genuine demographic changes in the South. I mean, the boom that we experienced. Everybody often talks about elections happening and the Democrats having a hold in the Midwest. Everybody from the Midwest who were young professionals because of the decaying of industry went to the South. So you had a lot of young professionals with families coming into Texas, into Georgia, into other places. And then you literally had a boom in the Latino population. Between 2020 and 2022, there's going to be an additional 6 million young voters eligible to vote. 2/3 of them are young people of color, and they are concentrated in the South. And I think that has a lot to do why we're battling for the soul of the country. Voto Latino in Georgia, to give you an idea, in Georgia, we registered and turned out 23,000 people. 10,000 of them were young people of color. Biden won by 12,000 votes. Every single vote really matters, but if you can't get access to it, and I think Georgia became in play because of the African American community, the Latino community, and the Asian community. Virginia turned blue because, well, now it's purple, but because of the Latino community, to give you an example, and the same thing as Georgia, is 4% of the population of eligible voters. They're 4% of Asian Americans. Together, that's almost 8 to 9%, plus the African American community. You have a constituency. At Voto Latino, the way we target, we identify places where they have at least a 10% community of color in a congressional district. And our theory is if we expand the vote there, registered voters, we could flip them. And we've done that successfully. We've identified 7 districts to do that in 2018. And we did that successfully in 5 districts. And then we did the same thing again, rinse and repeat. And it's because you have these individuals coming out. Just to be very, very brief, in Georgia, to give you an idea, Latinos are 4% of the population, right? They're 16% of the classrooms. In Texas, they're 23% of the eligible voting population. They're 52% of the classrooms. What the Republicans saw were the tea leaves of an aging in multicultural America. And they're like, wait a second, we're not going to espouse the things that we believe in. That's why I believe we had these modern day Jim Crow laws.
And Donna, thinking prospectively now about this election, there's a lot of pessimism among Democrats, in part because they say, yes, rising Hispanic, Latino population, but many of them are voting Republican.
No, they're not.
Well, I'd love to
Yep.
get some data on that from both of you, but that's one concern. Another is suburban voters that voted for the Democrats the last time around may not this time, particularly suburban women looking at inflation, other things like that. And then you've got just the overall historical record that the incumbent president's party loses in the midterms, always except I think once in the last 130 years.
We've been bombarded with conventional wisdom for the last year. Conventional wisdom say basically Democrats drop dead. That's conventional wisdom. And, there are many ways in which to look at conventional wisdom. Let's start with the fact that, in the first year after, your party, the first midterm after your party gains the White House, you automatically lose seats. That's conventional wisdom. If the president approval rating is underwater, you lose more seats. That could possibly lead to a wave, not a ripple. And of course, there's this notion that in midterms, young people don't vote, people of color don't vote. I mean, there are parts of the conventional wisdom that I think we could take apart and figure out how do we overcome or override some of these problems. One, let's start with the notion that President Biden's numbers are underwater, okay? Let's look and see where he's underwater and with whom. I think that there's a good case to be made that if we could focus right now, starting now, 198 days away, 195 days away, start focusing on young people, people of color, and to look at some of the areas where we know traditionally young people, people of color don't turn up in the midterms. I think that's number one. And we have ample number of Democratic governors who can help make up the lack of participation by utilizing and targeting their resources. So in states like New York and Illinois and Maryland, we got a Republican governor, he's stepping down, that's an open seat. But there are ample Democratic governors that should make up some of this firepower that we need on the ground. Right now, Galvin Newsom, make it up right now. Make it up in Nevada. So stop sitting around saying that we're going to lose before you even fight. That's number one. Number two, we need to start talking to people where they are. Stop asking them to watch MSNBC, CNN, Fox News, or whatever else. They're streaming. They're not watching any of that stuff. So go to them directly. Don't just depend on local news outlets. Go where they get their information and meet them. What I learned in Georgia in 2020 was like a wake-up call for, I think, my entire life of organizing. That is, we met people where they are. We went to the local grocery store. We went to Kroger's. If they got their meat and potatoes at Walmart, we went to Walmart. We had a strategy of meeting people where they are. We went to the community centers. We went to the churches. It was old-fashioned organizing. But you have to meet people where they are and stop all of this top-down crap. People are tired of it. And besides, they don't listen to it. And the second thing is that we have to make sure that our social influencers are talking directly to people. We don't talk to people until like 2 weeks before the election. Right. Talk to them now. Yep. Eric, I was in the Amtrak a couple of weeks ago, and this guy was just, telling me everything that Democrats are doing wrong. He said, "Are you the Democratic lady?" Well, I wanted to show, no. Because, it was that time of the day I just wanted a glass of wine and shut up, right? And he just kept coming at me. And finally, I didn't go after Republicans. I said, "What do you do?" He said, "I work here at Amtrak." I said, "Oh, so we haven't done anything." I said, "Do you know about the $95 billion that Joe Biden has secured for Amtrak over the next 10 years that will ensure that you have a job?" No, he didn't know anything. Most of the people we have helped don't know we've helped them. Most of the lives that we're going to uplift over the next 5 to 10 years because Joe Biden is investing in the long term. They don't know. When I told my family down in Sunset, Louisiana, that you're going to have broadband, so now you can call me with 5G. They're like, "Oh my God, they knew nothing." They had one commercial internet company. They will have 4 by the end of next year. And also, just telling folks in Louisiana that we have more mitigation services in case we get another 145 miles per hour hurricane. Yes, George Bush and Barack Obama took care of the levees and all the other systems down there. But Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are taking care of the next 10 years of hurricane mitigation. These are long-term investments. We may not see them tomorrow, but we have long-term investments. So we have to learn how to communicate better. We need more communicators. We need people at the grassroots level. And we need to engage people about why politics impact their lives.
Maria, Teresa, I want you to tell us a little bit about the numbers on the Hispanic and Latino population and how they vote. But also on this, I've never understood, why is it that the Democrats use all these phrases like Build Back Better? I think I'm like a smart person. I don't know what's in Build Back Better. I literally have no idea. Yeah. So like if I don't know, then most people don't know. What in the world is going on with the Democratic Party when it comes to communication, akin to what Donna's talking about?
It's perplexing. I'll answer both. But I think it was in November, I was brought into the Senate Steering Committee, and it was Senator Klobuchar and all the Democratic senators, and some of the best in business. Anita Dunn was there, a few others. And the idea was, what are we doing wrong in communications? And I stepped back, I said, well, you own all the communications. Like, you could literally go into Hollywood and have conversations with showrunners and talk about that. You could go into every single post office and said, these are all the services now eligible to you. You have all of it. And they're like, that's a great idea. So I don't know what to tell you. But I do think that what Donna's saying is that we have to meet people where they are is absolutely true. In 2016, Voto Latino had identified 10 celebrities, and we're like, that's fine. Let's keep using them. But then the amount of disinformation targeting Latinos in particular became such an issue. To give you an idea, they were showing Facebook ads targeting Latinos, saying, you don't need to go and vote. You can text your vote for Hillary Clinton. All very real, right? You can't text and you have to stand in line, or vote on Wednesday. The lines will share. So all this stuff, realized we need to figure out how to combat it. So we identified and trained over 267 influencers. People who had small Instagram accounts in El Paso, Texas of 3,000 to Selena Gomez, and gave them very clear information on how to use their social and how to. The reason we did it was that in June, we found that less than 50% of the people that we were targeting were going to vote early in 2020. With the pandemic and with all the shenanigans at the polls, we were very concerned. So we enlisted all these individuals. We met people where they were. We worked very closely with Nike, with Walmart, with Steve Madden, giving Zoomies, giving all of these corporate folks information so that they can share it with their constituency and their public. Long story short, 83% of the people we registered to vote voted early. They needed information. That's behavioral change. What we needed to do with the same thing is, what is it the fact that we need for the fact that there's a tax credit? I will tell you, we've been fighting right now for a reprieve of student loans. That's coming, but we need to brag about it and own it. Because the reason that's possible is because people voted and said, this is what we need. And so that's what we need to do on that front. I mean, we need to brag, and it's okay to brag. And in this case, it's okay to be obnoxious and brag, okay? Like, what are they doing for me lately? But on the Latino front, I will tell you, so in the middle of I believe it was November, the Wall Street Journal had a headline saying, if elections were held today, Latinos would vote between Trump and Biden evenly. And a good friend of mine conducted the poll. I read the fine print, and it turned out, you guys are all in the university, that they had pulled out a sample size of 165 people. No, it gets better. With a margin of error of 7.6%. That's malpractice. No, it is. It's malpractice. And then we started digging more, and we got really concerned because we're like, is that true, right? And so first of all, that was the headline everywhere because it's the Wall Street Journal. So we went in January, and we took something in the field, and we did 5,700 people in 8 battleground states. We oversampled for Latinos. And we found that it wasn't that Latinos were they were migrating to the Republican Party. No, they don't know what the Democrats are doing for them. 33% of them were thinking of staying home. That's the issue. And you look at the Latino community, 6 out of 10 Latinos that were older than 45 voted for Biden, 6 out of 10. Folks that were under the age of 35, 7 out of 10 voted for Biden. 60% of Latinos are under the age of 33. If I can't get a young person who's Latino to go out and vote, that's where they lose. But it's because we're not bragging. We're not talking about what are the efforts that we're actually making, that your vote actually counted, and that it's not as dire if we continue fighting. And something that you said, Donna, my grandmother always says, like, if you're gonna lose, don't lose stupidly. And right now we're on the verge of losing stupidly because we're hearing people say, well, we're not gonna win anyway. What are you talking about? There's literally more of us than there are of people who are anti-democratic.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've certainly got to meet people where they are.
Yeah.
We got to be prepared to tell people. We have to be educated, and if you're going to be in Louisiana, you need to be talking about mitigation and broadband. If you're going to be in Texas, you need to be familiar with the local issues there. But we also have got to be talking about democracy, and we have the capacity to talk about all the programmatic things we've done and talk about the danger to our democracy and what it's going to mean for people of your generation. I mean, if you care about reproductive rights, if you care about climate, if you care about saving our democracy, criminal justice reform, I mean, these things are on the ballot, and the choices could not be more stark. They are telling you what they're going to do. They're not fooling around. They're not trying to hide it. The stuff about, banning books. Let's talk burning books, I guess, will be next.
Tennessee wants to burn them. Literally today in the New York Times, they said how Tennessee is actually considering.
I go back to the early part of the 20th century. That didn't work out too well in Europe, and so you think about these kinds of things. So I think meeting people where they are and doing so in an educated way, talking to them about things that will move them, and don't underestimate, I think, the power of a democracy-based appeal to voters. You know, democracy is about, we're fighting for self-determination in Ukraine. We need to be doing the same thing here in the United States.
Picking up on Eric's point, I think the Supreme Court by June will have in this Mississippi abortion case, very likely that they're going to overrule Roe versus Wade. That will be a political detonation of sorts, I suspect. If that does happen, if that's right, how much does that change the 2022 election?
Well, I actually would ask everybody on the panel, and this is a genuine question, will it be something that will politically detonate, given the fact that in the run-up to the 2016 election, white women, 53%, I think, voted for Trump. You know, after all the stuff that he said about, and all the suits and all that stuff. Now, he didn't win women, but that's because women of color overwhelmingly voted for the Democrat. But among that demographic, will a Supreme Court decision, as Neal has described, will that be the thing that pushes, let's be honest about this, will that push white women in a different direction?
And just, of course, if there is this decision, which I think there will be, it's not some abstract theoretical thing, Donald Trump campaigning to overturn Roe versus Wade. It's happened for the first time in our lifetimes, even as old as we are. Roe versus Wade is not the law anymore. What happens then?
I think it has an impact in the South, the red states, it's not going to have that much of an impact, right? But I think where you need to look at is states where elections have been more or less toss-ups in recent times. So for the Democrats to keep control of the Senate, they need to hold on to the states where there's some vulnerability, like Arizona, Nevada, New Hampshire, and they need to pick up seats where they have a good shot, like Illinois and Pennsylvania. I think in the states like Illinois and Pennsylvania, it will matter. In states like Nevada, Arizona, it will matter. And so I think, given how narrow the margin, I mean, this is a pretty important phenomenon in American politics. How many elections have basically been coin flips, right? The margin of of votes has basically been what you would call rounding error in American politics. And so anything that pushes in one direction can have a huge difference. And so there are certain states where there's no doubt what the outcome is going to be. And then there's a handful of states, a handful of districts where we're not sure what the outcome is going to be, but it's probably going to be very, very, very tight. And in those states, I think this could have potentially huge impact.
Gregory, any states in which it actually helps the Republicans to have the Supreme Court overrule Roe? It looks like the Republican agenda has finally succeeded. Anything like that?
Well,
or is there already, those votes are already baked in?
My sense is that we basically have the Democrats control the coasts, right? Republicans basically control the South and the middle of the country, and then there's just a few states here and there where it makes a difference. So will it? The thing is, like the American electorate. I think we should start calling it the American rejectorate, because it seems like what the electorate has been doing a lot has been they vote for one party or vote for one set of candidates in one election, and the next election they vote for the other set of candidates, the other party, and so this will arguably this is if the Supreme Court does overturn Roe, it will be the biggest victory of the conservative movement in our lifetimes, right? And my reading of American politics is once one side wins, they demobilize, right? People become a lot less interested in pushing for that, right? So I think the momentum would be on the Democrats and the liberal side. We've lost something, right? It's when you give things to people, I think they're a lot less grateful. But when they lose things, they get a lot more motivated. And so the fact that we will have a very different regime when it comes to abortion rights, we haven't seen in our lifetimes. I just think that's going to, it could be a huge explosion for the Democrats.
So look, Georgia is a state that you didn't mention. Georgia, Raphael Warnock versus whoever on the Republican side. Could it be helpful to Warnock? Yes and no. Yes, I think in the suburban areas around Atlanta and possibly the college towns of Athens and possibly even as far south, maybe Columbus, Savannah. It could help him. I'm going to say something that might not fit well with the conversation. I am Catholic and I'm pro-choice. And I've always argued with my sisters and brothers, but my sisters mainly, that to talk about this issue, you have to frame it in terms of the full reproductive health services that we women require and deserve. And this is not only an attack on one aspect of our reproductive services, but it is an attack on us as women. I mean, how dare somebody tell me I can't do what I want with my body? I mean, that's what my grandmother was told, because she's a daughter of a slave. That's what my mother was told pre-Roe. I am not taking that. I'm not going to accept that I have no access to the full range of reproductive health services. Now, mind you, only Jesus would need an express body like myself if he ever came back. Trust me, okay? This ain't good for nothing right now, but if you want something, if Jesus wanted, he got it. The rest, I'm sorry. It's over, all right? Over. I'm not Sarah in the Bible. Ain't nothing coming this way. No Abraham, go home, all right? But the point I'm making is, we're going to have to be able to talk about this issue in ways that the far right, the religious right, don't want us to talk about it. And I'm not afraid. You see, I've never been afraid to talk about God. I've never been afraid to talk about health care in that context. But for Democrats, they just throw out abortion and don't throw out nothing else. Maternal health matters to black and brown women. Black and Latino women, we want to talk about our everything. Put everything on the table. It is going to be a charger for the right, but it may not be a driver on the left. So we're going to have to we're going to have to drive it home. Not just to young women, but for women, period. And especially religious women, spiritual women, women who want to, because it's been really politicized. I want to go back to something else you said, because I mentioned, Georgia. We have Senate races in Colorado that I'm concerned about. I'm worried about Bennett. Of course, we don't know what's going to happen in North Carolina, open seat. Pennsylvania is an open seat. And Mr. Trump has just about anointed everybody he can that's a celebrity. If you're not a celebrity, go to hell. He only wants celebrity candidates, okay? And we'll see what happens on May 3rd in Ohio. But we have Wisconsin is going to be a huge state.
Yep.
And that's where the abortion wars have always been, part of the agenda. I wouldn't be surprised if we didn't see this fight in Missouri. I mean, that's another state where we have a senatorial race, Blunt, that's an open seat. But let's see how Democrats handle this issue, how we talk about it. When I look at all of the money on the left, since organized labor, which was a driving force when I first started in American politics, meaning when I turned 18, the money on the left, whether it's the climate money or the pro-choice money, I wish they could message better to minority communities, Black, Latino, Asian American communities, others, as well as young people, because there's a huge disconnect.
Yep.
But this is such an incredible election year. 36 gubernatorial races, 35 senatorial races, all 435, as you all know, congressional races. You don't have to pick and choose. You can just go and say, I'm going to head down to Florida, head to Georgia, or I'll stick around in North Carolina. But the day of abandoning the South, Eric, I don't know how Trouble and Neal, when I saw Bill Cassidy and John Kennedy vote no for Ketanji Brown Jackson, I was pissed off because, once upon a time in my lifetime, I helped those senators become senators. I didn't call them a bad word today. These are former Democrats. Mr. Shelby in Alabama, 1986, following the Jackson campaign. I spent time in Alabama. Now, mind you, I was down in Mobile, Baldwin County. I wasn't up in Jefferson County or Birmingham. But the point is, I spent time in those states helping these guys. And now they're all Republicans. They all voted no. I kept thinking, had it not been for black votes, they would never have been elected to office. and they voted no. That's okay. The time will come when the South, a new South will arise, a new South that is going to be majority, Black and Latino. And we have to now invest in those states because we can flip this script. It may take us another decade, so I hope Eric is getting younger as I get older. But this is an opportunity for those of you who are from the South. Don't abandon the South.
Yep.
I'm going home next week. We have a Democratic governor. We got a Republican, everything else. And I don't like the seats, but I'm going home because I'm going to continue to go home. I'm going to do what Stacey did in Georgia and Louisiana. It's going to take me a while. And James Carville, if you can ever decipher what the hell he's saying, he's going to help me. Because I said, there's no reason all these river parishes should be Republican. We should have some ownership of these seats as well. So we got to start talking about how to empower people, how to use all your basic democratic tools, especially when they're under assault. But going back to that initial question on abortion, I don't want to get too fired up because, at some point you got to
This is you not fired up?
Why are you,
You should,
Neal?
you should see me when the Saints are playing. Thank God the Pelicans are doing good because, I can let some of my steam off. But how dare you take away and limit my rights to my body? We're going to have to do a major education campaign, not just listen to what the 5-4 or 6-3 decision is, but we're going to have to do a major education campaign. Because here again is the Supreme Court, which was bought, the Federalist Society. They are taking away our voting rights. They're taking away our reproductive rights. We're going to have to make that case, and we're going to have to make it plain and simple so everyday voters understand what this means for their lives and livelihoods.
So we don't have too much more time. I want to leave some room for audience questions, so I'm just going to do a lightning round with everyone, and if you have any questions, just go on, line up right by that microphone over there. My question for all of you, maybe just in 30 seconds, and we'll just start with you, Maria Teresa, is this conversation's been enormously pleasant. One reason it's been pleasant is all of you, but another is we haven't really mentioned that much the elephant in the room, Donald Trump. And if you're a Republican right now, like someone who only cares about winning, is Trump an asset or a liability to you in the 2022 election? If you could wave your wand and he goes off into the distance, is that a good thing for the Republicans or a bad thing?
I think that the genie's already out of the bottle for the Republicans. And I think that the one to watch is actually DeSantis. And I think he's formidable. He's smart and understands how the system works. And he's already told us his agenda. And it's not an American agenda. And very briefly, when we talk about reproductive rights, the case is against young women. The reason that white women as a whole are registering and voting Republican is because the common age of white women is 58 years old.
Right.
58 years old. They have other issues. And so this is the game right now. We won't have reproductive rights. We won't be able to overturn it if we don't participate in the midterms, because I can't imagine what would happen if a Republican-controlled House in 2024 would not certify a Democratic candidate for president. They already told us they wouldn't. So.
I think Trump is still a force within the party. I mean, he is going to drag, I think, to nomination a bunch of whack jobs, in these senatorial races to the nomination, who can be beat. He's obviously bad for the country. If he were to magically be transported to Mars, we could all pray about that. But Trumpism is still going to be a negative force in this country that we're going to have to deal with, whether it's DeSantis leading it or not for many years to come. But I think he is a net plus within the Republican Party. I think viewed large, I think he's increasingly a negative for the Republicans nationwide.
30 seconds.
Yeah, he limits my time. Trumpism is alive, I agree. But the Trump effect in terms of his endorsements, I think, is creating chaos and confusion, and it could possibly lead in the fall to Republican voters, especially the real MAGA voters, you know, being just disillusioned. So he is the cat on the hot tin roof today, but pretty soon that pussy is gonna fall down.
I think Trump hurts Republicans with independence, and I think as more stuff comes out from the January 6th Commission, you know, we have a federal judge saying that he thinks it's likely that Trump committed crimes. So I think there's a lot more of this story to play out. I think Republicans are going to vote for Republican candidates, Democrats are going to vote for Democratic candidates, and whatever. So a big part of the fight is over turnout, and then there's part of the fight is like on those independents who are not affiliated with it. And I think you know, Trump is problematic for winning those voters.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for the discussion. Initially, we talked about gerrymandering a little bit. Can you also comment on gerrymandering or other voter suppression when it's done within the party, within the Democrats to, you know, favor the incumbents over challengers, or scenarios where, as in Buffalo mayor's race, where the party was supporting write-in candidate because their candidate for general was too progressive?
Well, as a member of the party, and a former chair twice, I like to think that our rules are fair and equitable, but you have to compete everywhere for those voters, and you have to also compete for the party support. You know, there are those who believe that the only way to win a party's nomination is to ask half the people to leave the room, rather than to persuade those who are in the room and increase the number of people in the room. I like the Jesse Jackson theory and the Barack Obama theory. You bring more people in. That's how you win. That's how you persuade. That's why today's Democratic Party reflect not only the rules changes made by Reverend Jesse Jackson, but the rules changes that came about as a result of Barack Obama winning the White House. So we have a long way to go, but it's a more inclusive party than it was 20 years ago, and it reflects more of America's diversity than the other major political party.
Okay, let's have the next question. We'll just have one answer in general so we can get through as many as we can.
Yeah, thank you. Donna, at the beginning of the talk, you were saying that you don't think that we should fight like Republicans or fight the way Republicans do. And I've been an active member of CU Dem since my first year, and I've always been surprised by the amount of time that we spend actually discussing our just grievances with the Democratic Party, especially in recent times. We keep talking about why the Democratic Party doesn't fight like the Republican Party. And you look at what Ron DeSantis is doing in Florida and what he's doing to Disney World, and you look at the way the Republicans are willing to throw decorum to the wind and fight for their values, right? And they're willing to say, you know, our values are so important that the ends justify the means. And I don't think we should be overturning elections, but I worry that when, like Michelle Obama said, when they go low, we go high, what we're communicating to the American people is that we care more about doing things the right way than we care about our values. And I heard you speak about so passionately about these issues, but I feel like as a party, we have so many leaders who are simply not willing to fight back in very sort of lowball ways, like taking away Disney's tax status, calling out these companies, et cetera. And I wanted to ask whether you think, you know, even just controlling the Senate, we have a trifecta in the government right now, and we can't seem to even use it. What do you think? I just feel like, do you think we need to fight like Republicans? Why do you think we shouldn't? And do you think that sacrificing the, not doing that for the sake of decorum communicates that we don't hold our values quite as strongly as they hold theirs?
Let me just do 30 seconds here. I think there is some truth to what you say. I think Democrats and progressives are uncomfortable with the acquisition and the use of power. And we got to get over that. But doesn't mean that we have to use the tactics that the Republicans do that ultimately are anti-democratic and will not redound to the benefit of the nation. But we have got to be as tough as they are, but we don't have to mimic who they are.
I couldn't have said it better, Eric.
Okay, next question.
Hi, my question's actually for María, Teresa, Kumar. I love you, by the way, on MSNBC. I am a Latino voter from Texas's 15th Congressional District, and I'm pretty sure you've heard that the 3 most southern congressional districts have a chance to flip Republican for the first time in history. It's been Democrat since its founding, basically. So my question is, since you do a lot of research on Latino voters and stuff like that, what is making their strategies so effective? I think I could kind of answer this, but like, abortion is not enough, I think, to drive voters to the poll. Like, I'm Catholic, right? But like, if there's somebody that is extremely like pro-choice or anti-choice, that's not gonna drive me to the poll. Yeah. And of course, I'm saying that as a male, so there's a little bias there. But that's my question. Why is it so effective, and what can Democrats do to combat that?
Yeah, so first of all, we want to get you to a point where, regardless of male or female, you are voting for choice, but yes. we'll talk about that later. We need allyship in this movement, right? But in Texas, I will share with you, in September of 2020, we saw an explosion of disinformation happening in the Rio Grande Valley. Mm-hmm. And we flagged it for the powers that be, and no one paid attention. We saw disinformation hitting Florida in March of 2019. We worked very closely with DNC flagging it. Tom did a great job paying attention to that. We saw it then go into September of 2020 in the South Texas, and then we saw it rearing its head in Arizona. Arizona, 2 weeks out before the election. I'm still of the mind that had the election been a week later, we would have lost Arizona, and Arizona was 12,000 votes difference, right? That was close. So 2 things happened, I would say. One is that there's massive disinformation happening in the Latino community. The disinformation that was hitting the Latino community at the time was that Biden was going to abolish ICE. The challenge with that is that the #1 workforce in the Rio Grande Valley, for the most part, a good paying job is being part of Border Patrol. Exactly. So that's scary. The second one was that he was going to basically turn down all of the oil, and he basically was going to stop fracking. That's the second largest employment, right? And then you had a tactical error that Biden was the very first presidential candidate not to go to the Rio Grande Valley. Yeah, the first exactly. one. Trump went there, you may not like him, he went there all the time. So he was communicating that Biden was going to abolish ICE and that he was going to take away their jobs in the oil industry. And so it created this huge vacuum because there was no information. When we saw the disinformation, we were like, do you guys see lawn signs? There were no lawn signs.
No, oh God.
There were no lawn signs. I said, oh shoot. I said something else. And so we, at Voto Latino, we put billboards everywhere, register to vote, because we were a C3, so we couldn't speak more openly. But the biggest thing is that the candidate didn't show up. And so someone else came in and basically said, this other guy's gonna take away your jobs. And there's going to be work to do there, but I do think that I don't see it being. I don't see them flipping it. Mm-hmm. But if there's no attention and nurture, sure. It's like anything. And the challenge with the Latino community and young people in general is that, like I mentioned, 60% of Latinos are under the age of 33. Under candidate skies, and Donna can just speak briefly to that. If you haven't voted at least 5 times, you're never going to get a call from the candidate. Well, if you're less than 29 years old, you've probably voted once at best, but 5 times? So you're never going to get contact. So the Democrats really need to identify low propensity voter strategy because, again, if the majority of young people have probably just cast a ballot for the first time, sure. Unless there's a strategy there, they're not going to get a call in the midterm elections unless organizations such as Collective PAC, Voto Latino, and others actually step up.
Thank you.
Hi, my question's for Attorney General Holder. So I definitely agree that the most important issue on the ballot in this election is democracy, considering the extent to which the Republican Party seems to have abandoned it altogether. But my concern is that it seems election after election is an existential threat to the existence of democracy in America since 2016. And it seems to be getting worse as more and more Republicans are advocating for voter suppression laws across the South, trying to take Secretary of Stateships in different states to basically rig these elections and potentially refuse to certify the 2024 election. So my question is, beyond 2022, where do we go from here if we're basically dealing with a political landscape in the long term where one party has completely abandoned democracy altogether? Is there any solution, and can democracy continue to exist when a major political force, and one of two in our two-party system, basically has abandoned the idea altogether?
Yeah, we got to whip their asses. I mean, that's the bottom line. They can only do what they do if they have power, if they are in office. Gerrymandering, you get these gerrymandered legislatures that pass these bills that are anti-choice, that perpetuate their control of power. They're comfortable with the notion of a political apartheid system, political apartheid, where they are the minority party that has majority power. And so we've got to out-organize them. We've got to meet people where they are. You got to be really, keep your eye on gerrymandering, because you can't out-organize a gerrymander, And so that's why we've tried to make that at least fair. And I think, we've succeeded there. There's still some states out there that we're still concerned about. But we've got to win elections. And it's not, we can't just get excited. Barack Obama's running for president. Okay, I'm going to go vote. Or, hey, Donald Trump's running for president. I'm going to get out there and vote against him. Yeah, I want everybody to be excited about presidential elections, but there are off-year elections. There are elections down ballot. I hate the expression down ballot, because that somehow conveys that these elections of people who are at the lower parts of ballots are unimportant. That's our farm team. And that's also the people who have probably the greatest impact on your lives on a day-to-day basis. People who serve in state legislatures have a greater impact on your life probably than members of Congress on a day-to-day basis. And so what do we have to do? We have got to talk about this anti-democratic trend that Republicans have embraced because it serves their purposes. And then we just got to beat them. Beat them. We have the numbers. If we get our people to the polls, we will win. It's about turnout. It's about turnout. Hispanics maybe are not voting as democratic as they once did. Teresa will know that better than me. It's a question of margins, In these close elections, if you can shave the black vote by 1-2% in Georgia, Ossoff, Warnock, maybe they're not there, And so these suppression things are not designed to keep all black people away from the polls. It's just to keep the numbers down such that in a close election, with all the other stuff that they're doing, that they can win. And so it means educating our folks, identifying misinformation, going there, not going to a black church for the first time 2 weeks before an election. Where the hell were you 6 months before the election? Where were you a year before the election? There's a whole range of things that we have got to do better. We should not lose to the degree that we do. That is a fact. We simply should not. And so, I'll do my part on the legal stuff with regard to the rules, but we've got a whole bunch of stuff that you all, as young people, as influencers, as leaders of your generation, you're here, and that tells me a lot about who you all are. You all have to use the power that you have to make sure that the kinds of things that María has been talking about and that Donna has been talking about, that these things actually occur. It is possible. It is possible. We have, now the commercial. I got a book coming out May the 10th.
Good.
It's called,
Yay.
It's called Our Unfinished March. My co-author, Sam Koppelman, is here. And it talks about how there's been a consistent vote for voting rights in this country since we became a country. And the first people to fight for voting rights were white men who didn't have property. 6% of people who were of eligible age voted in the first election, 6%. And so then it's women, people of color, young people. This fight that we're in is existential. Yes, it was existential before. It gets more existential, if there is such a term, every time. But we can do this. We've done it in the past. We can do it again if we are focused on it and if we understand the stakes that we have to confront.
Well, with that, we are well past time. I was actually going to conclude by plugging Eric's book, which is called Our Unfinished March, and it's out on May 10th, as he said. But as I was listening to all of you, I just thank you for this conversation, because I was imagining myself being a student. Yeah, I wish I had this when I was in college. This was extraordinary, full of passion and knowledge and depth, and so thank you all very much for it.
Get out there and win. Good job.